Introducing Instagram teen accounts. A new way to keep your teen safer as they grow. Like making sure they always have their seatbelt on.
All right, sweetie pie, buckle up. Good job.
Or ring the bell on their bike.
Okay, kid, give it a try. Nice.
Or remember their elbow pads.
Knees too, okay? Yep. There you go.
New Instagram teen accounts. Automatic protections for who can contact your teen and the content they can see.
When living with cancer, it's important to be informed and know what to expect. But finding the right information can feel overwhelming. That's why UnderstandCancerTogether.com is here to help. We've gathered practical information and resources based on where you are in your cancer journey, so that you can focus on the important conversations and decisions of today. UnderstandCancerTogether.com, helping you navigate life with cancer, one moment at a time.
Now's the time for a great deal on a new Honda. It's time to drive smarter with high-tech features and excellent reliability. Check out the Honda Civic, Accord, or HR-V. For a limited time, well-qualified buyers can get a 4.99% APR on a 2025 Civic or a 3.99% APR on a 2025 Accord or HR-V.
See dealer for financing details. Exclude Civic Si and Type R.
Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Comm Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. Listen, folks, I'm still on vacation, so if something happens, go to ESPN.com. Someone will have a story on it. It won't be me, and I'm not going to update the podcast, so you're going to get this. You're going to get what you're going to get. Hopefully it's a quiet summer, folks. We all have earned that. Anyways, in a minute, I'll be joined by Criag Hoffman, who, of course, is a sports talk show host for the Team 980, also has the Take Command podcast that he hosts with and has with Logan Paulson. And you can find him on Twitter, X at Criag Hoffman. But I want to bring Criag on. Criag used to cover the team back in the day, and he's been around a few years now, but he's also been back out around the team this offseason a lot. So that's why I like to bring him on. He's got some observations. He's got a sense of what's going on out there that I think it leads to good conversation. So we talk about the offseason, we talk about what's going on, we talk about the different philosophies in the building, et cetera. So anyway, here we go. Here's my conversation with Criag Hoffman from the Team 980. Will Jaden Daniels climb to the top of the NFC East? Will the Commanders zip past the competition? We'll have to wait until the season starts to see, but you can get a head start on the competition this summer at the Adventure Park at Sandy Spring. Named the #1 aerial adventure park in North America by USA Today, the country's largest ropes course and zipline park is now open 7 days a week. Located in the heart of Montgomery County, Maryland, the Adventure Park offers climbing, ziplining, axe throwing, food, and more. Experience adventure day or night with your family, or leave the kids at home for one of the exclusive Keep It Lit adult-only events. These summer date nights are perfect, featuring glow lights, music, fire pits, and endless adventure. With challenges anywhere from beginner to expert, there is something for all skill levels. Not looking to scramble through the trees? Keep your feet planted in the pocket and throw a perfect spiral at axe throwing. You can throw at traditional targets or play any number of interactive games. You can even upload your own image. Anytime you're thinking about reaching new heights, make sure you know before you go. The Adventure Park at Sandy Spring is the only ACCT accredited park in Maryland or Virginia. So there you have it, folks. The best climbing, ziplining, and axe throwing in the country right here in the DMV. Reserve your adventure today at www.theadventurepark.com/kind. All right, Criag, so as this is being played, we're in the middle of summer. So we're a couple weeks removed from the spring workouts, a couple weeks from training camp.
And boy,
But,
John, is it hot outside.
well, and you can, yes. And right now it is. And I'm sure when this airs, it'll still be hot. So, yes. Anyways, but I am curious though, because things that I'm curious to see, like you were around the team a lot more. You were able to be around them a lot more this offseason than you have been in recent years.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say for you was the best development of the spring? And what do you think it means for camp and going forward?
I think the best development of the spring happened behind closed doors, and it's actually the staff. I know that some people think this is a big deal, some people don't. But I thought the cohesion of the staff, like you had to step back and be like, oh, right, these guys didn't know each other 4 months ago.
Right.
And you're like, right, that's insane. How well they work together. The fact that there seems to be a unified vision, Cliff and Joe being able to work together and get the things they need done, the smoothness with which practice ran. There's no tension, and it just creates a better environment. And at this stage of the rebuild, at this stage of where they are, creating that culture, creating that environment is going to help us figure out, and more importantly, them figure out who's worth keeping in the long term and who's not, and maximizing each piece of the player side of it, and frankly, the coach side of it, to understand this is the best version of this human being. This is what they bring to the football team. And that score, if you will, is worth keeping around long term or not. And to know that in years past, there has been a lot of tension amongst the staff, and that hasn't been the case. There's been a lot of confusion. There's been like literal conflict. All that stuff is come to a head. I just think the fact that it kind of took taking a step back and remembering that Cliff Kingsbury and Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr. and even, amongst the offensive staff, Anthony Lynn, Brian Johnson, these guys, maybe they knew each other in passing. They knew of each other, certainly being in football circles, but they had certainly never worked together outside of like DQ and Joe Witt until 4 months ago. And the ship is running this smoothly. So seeing that come together and kind of that united front, I think is the most important thing. Player wise, I think that's a little harder to answer just because it's still so early in the process. But like, honestly, that to me is the most important thing that came out of the spring, was that this seems like a genuine professional operation, which is going to give the players a chance to show what they've got.
And that's a good point too. And I will say, because like every time when I'm asked about that too, I bring up like the energy and all the juice that they bring, right? And that stems from, in part, from what you're saying and how guys are happy to go to the building now and all that. And so I kind of separate the long-term prognosis versus the 2024 prognosis, because 2024, it's kind of what you said. It's the stuff you see, and there's still questions in the field. We don't know how good Jaden Daniels will be this year. We don't know about the O-line, cornerback, et cetera. So how important for what you're saying too is that cohesion and when you're looking forward.
It's essential. And I think the other part of just the difficulty in answering it from like a direct player standpoint is some of these guys are new. Like, what's development versus what's new? Like, is Jaden Daniels developed? I don't know. He looked really good on day one and really good by the end. Better than I thought, but is that development or is that just how good he is? Same thing with, I think, a lot of other guys, because we just don't have a frame of reference. But to the cohesion point, I just think that culture matters so much. And when we say culture, I feel like that gets almost a bad, like woo-woo kind of rap, versus the example I'll use is Oklahoma City in the NBA. The Thunder have a way of doing their business as a basketball operation that continuously takes guys and gets the best basketball versions. This isn't about like feel good development as men, and all that stuff does matter. Like, being a good human being is ultimately a good thing. But I'm talking like as players, they get the most out of their guys in Oklahoma City time after time after time because of the way they go about their business, the way they care for the players in terms of, feeding them, and the sports psychologists that they have, and obviously the strength and conditioning staff that they have, the player development. And it seems like for the first time, certainly since I've been covering the team, and probably since you've been covering the team as well, that they have this kind of stuff in place in a new cutting edge kind of way, which is really feels cutting edge, but is just catching up to the rest of the NFL or the best teams in the NFL that have had this stuff. And so to give the chance for a late round pick like a Dominique Hampton to pan out and be the next guy that Adam Peters found in the 5th round that turns into a Pro Bowler. And I'm not saying that Dominique Hampton's going to. I'm just picking a name out of the late draft pick hat. It requires everybody in the building to support that player in their role, and it requires a vision by the coaching staff of how to use that guy to maximize his strengths, hide his weaknesses until they can fix his weaknesses, and he becomes an all-around player, but is able to maintain confidence throughout the process to continue performing at a high level as they add more and more to his plate. So all that cohesion and everybody on the same page matters, because it fuels that sense of belief that what we're doing is worth investing in. If I'm a player, I believe in the thing we're doing. So I am subconsciously going to give my all, because I don't have some kind of reservation that I don't think we're headed the right direction. And I think even the pad drill is a great example of that. If there was a couple of coaches that were off to the sideline, like kind of making fun of it, the buy-in, especially from those position groups, dies instantly. And instead, like, everyone from the coordinators on down is out there hooting and hollering and getting those guys riled up and ready to go. And it just creates a buy-in that gives the experiment that they are running a chance, or maximal chances of success.
And that's a good point. And it's funny too. There's two things with that. Excuse me. I was watching the D-line go through drills, one of the last practices, and I'm watching like John Allen and Deron Payne, the way they're competing, and just how much it actually, I'm like, it's June 12th, and these guys look like they're enjoying being out there competing. And it wasn't because they're like having lollipops and ice, and ice cream, whatever. Yeah. It's because they're having fun with the atmosphere that's been created. And and that's why I say long-term, that's really good. Short-term, I don't know the payoff, but back to the other point too.
Well, can I just double click on that real quick?
Yeah.
For, two things. One, I talked to Daryl Tapp on my show. He sat down like an hour after you did when you came on, however many weeks ago it was in the bubble after minicamp. And Daryl kept using the word intention. Like, there's an intent to everything that Dan Quinn does, and that filtrates down to the staff. But I'll put my strength and conditioning coach hat on here for a second. If I'm training an athlete and I want to get their maximal, like, explosive first step out of them, saying, I want you to go as fast as you can, is not as effective as putting them next to someone else and having them compete, or putting them on a stopwatch and being like, I'm going to time your first 10 yards and we're going to do explosive 10-yard splits. And I want you to try to beat your time every time. Because that is an extrinsic motivation that's like, I got to get it. And it fuels an actual better performance. So yes, it is fun, it's competitive, it's all these things, but there's also an intent of actually getting a better result out of the drill. And that kind of thought is the kind of thought that they put into coaching that I would say the previous staff and staffs that I have covered didn't necessarily do.
Do you, and I'm going to get back to that in a minute. So, but before to finish the other thought, I want to go back to it because I think that's important. But going back to the player development, and I think it matters too that the coaches believe in who the front office is giving them. Mm-hmm. And the front office is very good at finding out what do the coaches need and want. Not that you just listen to only what they say, but you certainly take into account. Because you go back to like the Jay Gruden era, and there are coaches, like I go back, way back. So I'm going to go way back to the beginning and start there. When Dan Snyder took over, I remember talking to someone here, is like, the one thing that concerns me with him is I don't think he knows how to put together a team. Well, I think we saw that play out, and he didn't understand what team building was and all that. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
Then you go back to, I talked to like guys like Vinny Serrato and people like that, like how Dan would pester them to sign Jeff George, got to get Jeff George. And for a year they withstood that. And finally one time Snyder just like, I'm the owner, go get him. Now, Jeff George, I actually enjoyed him, but the point is like the football side didn't want to bring him in. They had Brad Johnson, blah, blah. And then you go back, a couple of years ago, they're bringing in Paul Richardson. That was as much a Snyder, Bruce Allen thing, because they wanted a guy with speed, and he had speed because they lost to Sean. Coaches didn't, the Jay Gruden was not on board with that. Zach Brown, some of these guys, like they were not on board with. And not only they bring him in, they re-signed him. So it's, when you have that situation, I just don't know that you can develop guys, because that the coaches don't believe in guys.
No, the phrase that Dan dropped in that video the Commanders put out, you can only coach someone to the depth of your relationship with them.
Right.
It is so perfect. I have thought about that nonstop as a coach myself in the fitness work that I do as a strength and conditioning coach and a performance coach. Like, I think about that a lot. And it doesn't mean you have to be best friends with everybody that you coach, but it does mean you need to understand what motivates them. You need to understand who they are as a person. And that is how you're going to ultimately get the best out of them. And Logan and I talked about this quite a bit in the draft process on Take Command about, if you're a coach and you believe in a guy and you get on the table and you stand up for him, you're like, that's my guy.
Right.
You want to be right. You're going to make sure that you work your tail off to make yourself right, because we're all egotistical human beings at the end of the day. Of course, you want to see the kid succeed because you believe in him, but you also are like, I want to be right. And that's a very, very heavy motivator. Just ask me. I'm a sports talk radio host who makes predictions. But I think that, that relationship side of it is huge. I also think back to, on the owner side of it, the Commander's Log episode that chronicled the draft, and Josh Harris in the draft room. It's okay for an owner to ask questions as long as they're not driving the answers, right?
Right.
Hey, let's get really, and also something that I think is a sidebar quickly to point out is Josh Harris is a lot smarter at asking questions than Dan Snyder. So just because if Dan Snyder did that, Josh Harris shouldn't, isn't actually salient analysis, because Josh will ask good questions and accept the answers from the people that he hired. But they're looking at Senate. He asks Adam Peters and Lance Newmark, and he's like, well, will he play if Zach's on the team? Because Josh realizes, like, this is a pretty high pick for a guy that we already have. We just signed a guy. Like, how does this all work? And they're like, oh, no, like, he does different things. Like, he'll definitely be on the field. And Josh is like, great, awesome, let's go. Yeah. Because he trusts his people. But it's okay to ask the question. You want to make sure they've thought about that. Are we properly allocating our resources? So all of that comes together into just a level of competence that should give fans, I think, a lot more hope moving forward. Still a lot of unanswered questions. It still has to work on the field. There are no guarantees in the NFL, but the process is just so much better. And I'd rather have a good process than a bad one.
Right. And that's what I keep saying too. I think the approach, which is the approach/process, this is what you have to take to build a good team. And when it gets there, who knows? But it's the approach you have to take, because we know the other way was just throwing it together. And the questions, if, when Dwayne Haskins sitting there at 15 and Dan Snyder says, well, who are we going to take? They already knew. There was no debate. They knew who they were taking. There was resigned to that. It was not a question designed to hear anything other than one guy. So, that's different. But again, going back to the competition stuff too, because to your point, it's not like no coach has ever done the competing thing. Like when you put the one-on-one situation with the corners and all that. So there's obviously pockets throughout there, but when you can intersperse it throughout drills, it hammers it home even more. And in the defensive line drill, Craig, I'm watching it, and it was all to see who could get to the bag quickest. Right. And I'm seeing like Daron Payne and John Allen wanting to go against one another, like the two best line, you know what I mean? And like, because they were hungry for that. And so I think it matters as you've covered this, and I know that you're big into sports. It's not like you're new to sports by any means. This has been your life, but from an NFL perspective, is that something did you realize maybe the importance of doing that in these little drills? Is that something you've learned over the years, or is that, or, you know what I mean? Or did you just,
I definitely think
been done before?
Yeah, I definitely feel like I've appreciated it more. And it's been funny for me in the weird, like, dual life that I lead. So for those that don't know, that aren't as familiar with me and my personal background story, I'm not just referencing being like a strength and conditioning coach for funsies. Like, I do that. I train high level athletes. I've helped played a small role, whatever role that we can play as strength and conditioning coaches, and helping some athletes go D1, all that kind of stuff over the years. So I've been a strength coach now for almost 10 years, or I guess 8 years. 2016 is when I started doing that. And some of the working in that field and the mirroring of lessons that happen that I see covering sports, I think has been a really interesting intersection, and coming to appreciate how to get the best out of athletes. Because sometimes I learn something in the strength and conditioning world, and then I see it differently as a media person. And I'm like, oh, that's really smart. I understand what they're doing on a deeper level now. And sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes I see a coach do something, I was like, oh, I like that. I'm taking that to my people over here. So I think it's been kind of this combination of just understanding the mental side of athletic performance, and really diving into that more in the last 3 to 4 years. When I say the mental, not just like a pure approach, but the literal neurology of it all, how our nervous system impacts everything that we do. how to get people to relax when we want them to relax, how to use tension in a positive way. Like some of these things that are essential to athletic success so that you don't get overwhelmed under pressure, or you don't get decision-making fatigue. And so just to having a greater appreciation, I think, for those things and kind of the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Does it come from inside or does it come from something outside? And what's better in certain situations? Like, I think all of that stuff has kind of come together. Some of it being learned as a reporter or whatever you want to call me now, talk show host who masquerades as a reporter by showing up to practice, and a strength and conditioning coach who's worked with not only soccer players and football players and basketball players, but now I'm in this world of hybrid fitness and hybrid sports and high rocks. And it's just a totally different type of race and challenge from like a fitness standpoint. And it's more endurance based and how endurance athletes think versus, these sport decision-making athletes like a basketball, and just kind of taking it all in and trying to continue to learn along the way. I don't know if I answered the question, but hopefully I did.
I think so. And while you're training hybrid fitness, all that, I'm driving a hybrid. So so we have some
I do too. So, I think
So-
consistency is important in life.
Along those lines too, and it is funny though, because even I've coached a lot over the years, youth stuff and all that. And even in practice where you have an hour a week or an hour and a half a week or whatever, you try to incorporate as many competitive drills as you can where the kids think it's just a fun drill, right?
Yes.
Like it's just a fun thing to do, but it's about competing and somebody going to come out winning and you have to compete in these drills. They think it's like, oh, good, dribble tag in basketball. Well, I'm working like, okay, you can only dribble with your left hand. Like, but there's always designed
Right.
to do that, right?
Like we can do drills that work on acceleration and deceleration, or we can play Simon Says or red light, green light.
Yes, exactly. And but it's like, and obviously that's very elementary, but you see that a little bit more now. And it's hard to do that with every drill, but the quarterbacks throwing into the net, that's a competition drill all the time. Now, did they do some of that before? Yes, not to the same degree though. Not to the same degree. And so, I think there's a lot more of that. And again, what it means for this year, I don't know, but I think it's the right approach to build what you ultimately want.
And I think when you have such highly competitive people, low stakes competitions are really fun and easy because hey, the point of this is, or the consequences of losing are you have to do 10 push-ups. Who cares?
Right.
The point is to win
Right.
because you want to
Right.
win because you're prideful. And these are the most hyper competitive people on the planet. And it's the bragging rights, not the 10 push-ups, but it just adds enough. And it's also at that point still fun. Like it's not serious enough that it's like, hey, your starting job is on the line or $10,000 is on the line or whatever. So it becomes very jovial and fun. It becomes, haha, I beat you. But by the way, we're going to do this drill tomorrow. And I know that it could be coming back at me. And so it generates, and as coaches, you can manipulate this stuff too, right? Like you can put John Allen versus Deron Payne, or you can, if you got a really quick guy in a particular drill and you're trying to get John a little motivated, even though he's not as good of a player as John Allen, like put that other guy in there, make John Allen beat him.
And they did that.
Yeah. You told the great story of Jamin and KJ Henry, where KJ's like, I'm not losing to no safety. Like you can motivate guys like that. It's low stakes, but it's really fun. And by the way, it also gets the training adaptations you want if I'm going to insist on being nerdy about it.
And what I liked about it is watching that they would put random guys together, but John and Deron went in there on their own against one another. That's what I like. So, what about like with quarterbacks? So I think by law, we're supposed to talk about Jaden now after 20 minutes, but I am curious, like in general, how long you've been around the team now? 10 years?
2015. So yeah, this is year 9, I guess.
You're a puppy.
It's funny because I had some interview the other day where I was like, yeah, I've been covering sports for 15 years. When the hell did that happen?
Trust me.
You're like, yeah. Wake me when you get to 20.
I call 15 halftime. So, but with quarterbacks though, like what have you seen over the years that when you started versus now that you feel like, okay, I used to think this was the most important thing. Now I realize it's this. Is there anything in particular or,
Yeah, I think, it's funny because you sent me this as a topic to think about. And I was like, well, I haven't actually really seen any successful ones because I've been covering Washington for 9 years and neither have you, and you've been covering it for 25. So there's that. I think that I value physical traits a little bit less than when I started, and processing and like, I'm going to use the phrase mental toughness, mental resilience. That's a better phrase. Resilience more now, because I think the most important thing a quarterback can do is see what he's supposed to see with clarity and then make a decision off of that. Of course, there is a requisite amount of arm strength and kind of fundamentals and accuracy that you really need. And I do think accuracy is one that comes back around too, where I'm like, man, some quarterbacks that like an Alex Smith obviously didn't have the world's strongest arm. It was plenty strong enough. He was the number 1 overall pick. So Alex had a ton of physical talent, even if he's kind of seen of as this more conservative guy. But Alex saw what he was supposed to see with clarity. He put the ball where it was supposed to be, and he was risk averse. And I actually think all those things are really important. You have to take the right risks. You have to understand the time, score, situation, when it's okay to arm punt. If it's 3rd and long and you want to take a deep shot into double coverage to your number 1 guy, like, okay, whatever, you're going to punt the next down anyway. Well, unless there's a 15-yard dig that's about to come wide open that could have gotten you the first down. So like you have to see the things with clarity and process them in real time. And it's just a ton of information. And because of that, the amount of decisions that you have to make within a play, nevertheless within a game as a quarterback, the amount of communication you have to do, there is a resilience mentally that you need to have to just continue to make the right decisions time after time after time after time. And that is a skill. And so I think those things really come together. So to sum it up, resiliency and clarity in decision-making, and then ultimately like accuracy, anticipation, putting the ball where it's supposed to be on time. And whether you can do that because you have a strong enough arm to wait an extra half beat, or because you throw with great anticipation and then add the accuracy brings either path together. I think those are the things that I really value in a quarterback, which, to bring it back to Jaden, because we're required to by law, is why I'm even higher on Jaden than I was in the draft process, where he was my quarterback 1B with JJ McCarthy, because he seems to have that calmness and that resiliency to be able to process the information. And we saw it in the spring in some of the drills where there's time on the clock, and he just way better than Marcus Mariota, even, who's been around for a long time, did not get sped up, knew how much time he had, knew what he had to do, and did it at a very high level.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you too, like exactly what you did see from him in that area, and what are some of the things that you look at it and say, okay, this is, whether it's offering hope, whatever it is, like, optimism for the future with him, and maybe 1 or 2 things you say, okay, obviously there's a lot more to learn about him, but what was anything in the draft process that you might say, like, still need to see this?
Well, I think in the draft process, the thing that you would occasionally get concerned about is the decision-making ending so often on the outside, which was not so much like a negative as it was a question mark for me,
right,
because he had 2 first-round receivers, including one who went in the top 5 or 6. I guess Giants were 6. Malik Neighbors. Like, of course he did. Like, so often it was a good decision to throw to those guys. So just because they were lined up outside, that was also the design of the offense. But in the NFL, you're going to have to make these more difficult throws over the middle of the field. And was he avoiding them because it was muddy and he didn't see it clearly, or because he's like, hey, I have Malik Neighbors one-on-one again, let me throw the ball to him.
Right.
And then you see in camp, he's consistently looking over the middle of the field and throwing those touch passes. And you're like, okay, well, he can do that once the bullets are live and the pads are on. Well, that answers that question in the affirmative, but we haven't seen it. And then I think that obviously leads to the other thing, which is when the pads come on and the bullets are live, how does he handle pressure? I know you went back and watched, you talked about this during the process, that the sack to pressure ratio was high, but it was fairly explainable on tape. Like, it wasn't a lot on him, but what does that look like when it's in the NFL? We just don't know yet. And I think that's ultimately like a good thing. If we're in a bunch of like, hey, I feel pretty good about it, but I don't know yet, versus like, oh man, this is a major red flag. Like, that's a great place to be. And that's also why the dude went number 2 overall. So I feel like, even I liked Jaden a lot, especially by the end of the process. The more I heard about who he was, the more I understand. And I'll actually say this. I think the thing that I appreciate about Jaden more than anything else is he knows himself. He learned somewhere along the line at LSU that he is an experiential learner. And what that means is he has to learn by doing. And so not every quarterback needs to show up at 5:45 and go through the motions of practice beforehand. He knows he does. And that's why the virtual reality stuff was so good for him, because it's essentially doing it. And the fact that he knows that about himself and he knows how to learn it just blows the ceiling off of what he can be, because he understands how to learn new things, and that will benefit for him for not only the rest of his career, but the rest of his life.
Well, it's funny because with the VR stuff, and I talked to people at LCU about that, and certainly there's some people who feel like it was a great help, and other people feel like it was a help, but that he would have gotten there anyways because of the work he was putting in. However, he felt it was a huge help, and that's what's important. And it certainly, you can't argue with the success he had after he started doing that. And so I do think it's, he does know who he is and how he has to learn, but it's also, when I was talking to somebody there, it's like they were kind of lucky that they had a guy who embraced the technology to get better. And there's a growth mindset with that.
Yeah. A buddy of mine, Vinny Scolo, who's a trainer up in the Syracuse area. I mean, he trained a bunch of NFL guys over the years, Latavius Murray, amongst others. He has this great phrase about keeping a white belt mentality, which in martial arts, the white belt is the one they give you when you walk in the door. You don't have to do anything to earn it. You just show up and you're like, hey, I'm here to learn. And they go, okay, here's a white belt. And even though you're going to learn stuff along the way, you're going to become smarter. You're going to become better. Vinny is always like, I want my guys to come in, and I want to come in every day with a white belt mentality that I am here to learn and get better. And I think Jaden has that, but he also has enough confidence to bring people together. And I think that's the other thing that you've done a great job. And Nikki and the folks that are truly around the team every day and connected in the building have, Standig is reported on this as well. But I know this is the John Kine report. Only John is reported on this, that he has a way of bringing people together. And I think it goes back to where we started this conversation too, of that's the atmosphere in the team. And Jaden, as a young leader, embodies that, which is why they wanted to bring him into the team to say, I don't care if you're an offensive guy, you're a defensive guy, special teamer, like we're all one team. We're going to talk to each other. We're going to have relationships. It's more people to learn from. Like Jaden has a relationship with Bobby Wagner already. That's fantastic. And that doesn't happen on a lot of teams. And to have those guys that are connectors, to have the atmosphere in the building be connected, and to have your young quarterback be one of those people, A+, no notes. Like that's going to matter for this team in the long term. That will long term lead to wins.
Oh, sure. And that's why I say there's a separation of long-term approach versus the short-term, the immediate success. And it's funny because it's not just Wagner. It's guys like Jeremy Reeves, like Bobby Wagner. Everyone wants to get to know him. He's, these guys,
same.
Right. I mean, listen, I sat down with him and talked to him about leadership because I'm fascinated by what this guy has accomplished. And then you put yourself like in a player position where they're just like, there's a reverence for him. But for me, like with Daniels, it was also Jeremy Reeves told me the story about how he went in there in the locker room his first time I met him. And he's like, hey, Revo, he's like, he knew his name. And like Jeremy's accomplished things in the NFL, but he's not like he's not Jamar Chase sitting in there, right? He's a really good special teamer who's had a great story and all that, but he's not Bobby Wagner. And so like that to me is where it's also at as well. And so anyways, let's finish up on one last thing going in a different direction, but Jamin Davis, putting him at edge rusher. I don't know how much, again, pads have to come on for him. And my thing is like, give him time to see where it goes. But I'm curious what you think of this experiment and where, just curious what you think of the experiment there.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by it. There's a part of me though that's like, I don't know. Jamin Davis has also been an all right linebacker the last couple of years, whose growth trajectory, despite the coaching, like very much in spite of the coaching, has been all right. So why don't you try to just maximize him at linebacker? But I also understand that they have watched him. They're way smarter about football, and especially defensive football, than me. They know the linebacker position really well. And if Ken Norton's like, I think we should try this, I don't know if this guy's a linebacker, I'm going to listen to Ken Norton. So it's worthwhile. I understand why they do it. He's got great athleticism, a tremendous athletic profile. So you talk about like arm length and things like that to potentially do it. My question, of course, is going to be, can he learn the skills? Like that is an art. There is an art to pass rushing, and can Jamin Davis learn how to paint a little bit? Not like he needs to be a world beater. And it's a different game when you're on that line of scrimmage from like being a run defender and things like that. But presuming they use him in just pass rush situations, if he can get the edge, and I think it also is worthwhile because their edges are not that, like they don't have a pass rusher on the edge. They're going to rely on tricking it up a little bit. So this is the year to try it, both for him contractually and where he is on the timeline and where they are as a defense. And if it works, amazing. Like, that's found gold. If not, there's really not a lot of downside to it. So I guess I don't really have a file yet because I haven't put pads on, and I really honestly didn't spend that much time watching it in terms of what I think of the experiment so far. But on a macro level, I think it's worth the experiment.
And I also think it speaks to what they feel about the linebacker depth, if they're willing to do this, because you bring in, and I think Jordan McGee is a guy who's going to be one to watch, whether this year or in the future, and how he develops too. And I think they feel comfortable enough about the depth there, which the last few years, nobody felt good about the depth there. And I think that's another signal that, it's worth a shot, because if it pans out, if it doesn't pan out, you're still covered. He can go back and play it. But if he does, you're covered there. You got Lulu, you got, if McGee develops, you got a couple other vets there behind them. So much different spot. And I think that's what it also signals. So anyways, Craig, I know you got other stuff. Tell people, and I would have, before we came on, I would have already told them, but tell them again, you and Logan, all your places that you got going on.
Yeah. The Take Command podcast. If you like John's pod, I think you'll like ours as well.
I agree.
Logan's been on John's quite a bit as well. So you're familiar with his work for sure. That's on all your favorite podcast platforms, full episodes on YouTube as well, at the Team 980 and at 1067 The Fan. And then the Hoffman Show, my daily radio show where we talk lots of Commanders, but also other things, is 4 to 7 on the Team 980. You can listen on the Odyssey app anywhere in the US. And we also stream that live on YouTube at the Team 980, and lots of clips and highlights and all the things on YouTube at Criag Hoffman as well.
Craig, thank you very much, man. Enjoy it.
Always my pleasure. Thanks, John.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Craig for joining me, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. I'll be back with another episode later in the week with my colleague from New York, ESPN's Jordan Raanan, talking about the New York Giants and getting some of his thoughts on what he felt, what his perception is of the Commanders, their offseason, but also offensive line coach Bobby Johnson. He knows him well. I'll talk to you next time.